Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by sharing exactly what's been going on in my own allotment, my own kitchen garden. I've been growing my own for over 30 years, but I still learn something new every single day. Now, coming up this week, back in the podding shed, I have our book of the month, which I've thoroughly enjoyed reading. Out in the kitchen garden, we have our seed of the month, which is French or climbing beans. But before all that, we're going to head down the allotment to find out what's happening down there. Well, I'm down on the allotment and, well, it is getting rather warm now. I thought it had started to cool down, but I still wanted to come down to the allotment in the early part of the day just to try and make use of that cool part of the day. But all I can say now, I've been down here a couple of hours, it has got a little bit too hot now. Now, one of the things I've been focusing on is my tomatoes. I grow lots of different varieties of tomatoes because there are so many different varieties, hundreds and hundreds of varieties. Now, it is Tomato Fortnight, which is an initiative set up to recognise all the joys of growing tomatoes and the wonders of tomatoes. You know, there's a week or a day for everything these days. And these 2 weeks, it's Tomato Fortnight. Now, I've got to say, I am growing about 8 different varieties of tomatoes. I've got the beefsteaks, because I like to grow some nice beefsteaks to go in my sandwiches. We got our standard salad tomatoes, which are nothing really special, but taste delicious. We got our cherry type, or our sprawling type of tomatoes, which I grow in hanging baskets. And then we've got our aroma or plum tomatoes as well, which are generally used for passata. And this is why I grow so many different varieties, because we want to fill in all those different types, but we also want to try and make the most use out of them in the kitchen. That is why I grow so many different varieties of tomatoes. And in total, between here and at home, I have about 30 plants growing. Could probably still do with more, but it is what it is. We only have so much space. There's only so many tomatoes we can grow. Now, I do grow my tomatoes in the greenhouse as well as outside. The tomatoes in the greenhouse generally come along a little bit earlier. They don't taste as good as outside tomatoes, I will say, but the real benefit is that we avoid blight by growing them in the greenhouse. Any tomatoes growing outside, unless they are blight resistant, are susceptible to that fungal disease that affects tomatoes, potatoes, and anything in that particular family. And it is really devastating because they can literally rot your crop within a week. As soon as it comes in with some certain conditions available, that fungal disease just spreads and that blight wipes out our crops. So I do find growing some inside a greenhouse means that we guarantee a harvest avoiding blight. But outside, I try to make sure I include some of our blight resistant varieties. Things like Crimson Crush and Crimson Blush are just 2 of the varieties that I can think of offhand. And they are pretty good. They're not as good as our non-blight resistant in terms of flavour, but they do mean that we do get a crop. Now, my tomatoes in the greenhouse, back at home, they're in my auto pots, or down here on the allotment, they're in my large pots. But outside, they are grown directly in the soil. Back at home, I do have some of these water rings, which are simply a pot that you place on the soil. The centre, you fill up with compost and you plant your plant into it, but it's got a moat running around the outside that you fill up with water, and that gently keeps water trickling into the roots of the tomato plants. And that means that tomato are consistently watered. The trouble is they are expensive, so I only had 3 of those and I saved those for at home. Down on the allotment, I've just planted my tomatoes straight in the ground, bit of mycorrhizal fungi, bit of plant feed, watered them in well, of course, and we're letting them continue to grow. Now, I have placed a stake using a hazel stick alongside every single tomato, and as the tomatoes grow I just simply use a bit of twine and attach that around the plant and around the hazel stick to encourage the plant to grow upright. Now, some tomatoes do naturally grow upright and don't necessarily need a stake, but I just prefer to do that nonetheless. Now, a good mulch, of course, goes a long way with tomatoes, and I like to add some straw, compost, whatever I may have available as the tomatoes are growing. It is very important that the tomatoes, the soil, never dries out. One of the things you often hear people talk about with tomatoes is that they split or you get blossom end rot. And this is often due to the lack or inconsistent watering. So make sure when it comes to tomatoes that we consistently water our plants. Now, for me, this is a very easy thing to manage. What I tend to do when I plant out my plants, I water them in daily, and then once they're established, we water them in good deep watering once a week. But we do add a mulch, and as you know, I'm using straw more and more as a mulch, and that just locks in that moisture, stops the soil from drying out, and hopefully leads on to producing some good tomatoes. In terms of feed, because our tomatoes externally anyway, outside, are not flowering yet, I'm just using once a week a bit of seaweed feed. This just encourages some good root systems. And once a plant has some good root systems, we know we're going to get good plants above. So just a bit of seaweed feed. As soon as they start flowering, once a week I then use a tomato feed. Now, some people will do every fortnight. I do every week. And using this feed just encourages more flowers, which in turn leads to more fruit. Now, I did mention that tomatoes grown in a greenhouse are often a little bit earlier. And that's certainly the case. But back at home, I've got a tomato plant that is grown in my hydroponic kit that has been growing for over a year. It's about 18 months old and it's just starting to produce, and they're ripening its first tomatoes. So it's certainly very possible to grow tomatoes early, and it's certainly possible with the right conditions to grow tomatoes all year round. It's very energy intensive, but it is possible to grow tomatoes all year round. Now, one of the other things that I do have to keep an eye on as well is these side shoots from our tomatoes. This is where you have your main stem, you have your branch coming off to the side, and in between the two you sometimes get a side shoot. I simply pinch those out as soon as I see them. Some people will actually plant those side shoots to try and get some more plants. That's certainly an option. It's not something I do myself, but it's certainly something we can think about doing to get more plants. So, in my opinion, there is nothing better than a fresh, homegrown tomato ripened by the sun. It tastes so much better than anything you can grow from a supermarket. My tomatoes here are looking pretty good. Now, what else have I been doing down here on the allotment? Because it has cooled down, I have planted out some sweet corn and some squash plants. And our sweet corn has gone into a bed, and I'm planting those, not in rows, but in blocks. Simply just cleared away any weeds, planted them in and gave them a good watering, and I'm hoping they're going to grow nice and strong. The plants themselves do look really good and strong as well, but hoping they're going to grow nice and strong and go on to produce some good sweet corn as well. We plant them in blocks because they are pollinated by the wind, not by pollinators. So they need to be able for other parts of a plant to catch hold of some of the pollen when they produce. In my straw bales, I've planted out courgettes, butternut squash, marrows, and they are looking good as well. They seem to be taken quite well. Now, overall, the allotment is coming along quite nicely. We've got pretty much every bed now planted up. I don't think we have much in the way of spare space. But any spare space we do have will be filled up with something that we might have growing at home. One of the things I've been noticing as well with my potatoes, my first early potatoes were planted back in March, and we had that cold snap a few weeks ago which did set them back. Well, what I've noticed is that my main crops and my second earlies that were planted much later but weren't above the ground when that cold snap came along, they seem to have grown bigger than the first earlies that have been in the ground a little bit longer. And I put this down to that cold snap. It just set those first earlies back a little bit. I'm sure they'll still be fine. Sure, we're still going to get some good crops out of them. But it just goes to show the effect that how the cold weather can slow things down and set things back. And that's why we need to remember to net things and keep an eye on the weather. So there's been quite a bit going on down here on the allotment. I think it is now time to head on home and get a nice cold drink. I'll meet you back at home in the kitchen garden where we got our seed of the month, which is going to be French beans, a perfect plant to fill in some of those spaces as they become available. So I'll meet you back home in the kitchen garden. In the meantime, let's find out what's going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, I hope you are enjoying this podcast so far. If you are, you know what I'm going to ask you. Please rate and review this podcast on your favourite podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it really helps us out. It helps us get found by more people who are also looking for ways or inspiration on how to grow their own food. Now, added to that, if you are also enjoying this podcast, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Your support keeps this podcast running, and it is so important. To be a member costs just £5 a month, but for that £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. But also once a month through the letterbox you will receive our monthly seed pack, and that seed pack contains a collection of seeds that I have carefully chosen to be sown in that very month. But you also get a copy of our mini newspaper, and our mini newspaper gives you instructions on how to sow those seeds that I've just mentioned. It also gives you a list of tasks that you can do throughout the month, as well as the opportunity to take down some notes and use as a tool yourself. I use it as a tool myself and I find it very useful. Now, as an example, over this last week we've been sowing some rocket as part of the Supporters Club. Rocket is a fantastic vegetable. We grow it all the time here. It's delicious in our salads, and we're eating a lot of salads at the moment, being that it is now summer. But I've also sent out June's seed pack over this last week, and that is a great collection of seeds that we're sending out this month. Now, if that sounds like something you would be interested in, then please just head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and sign up. We'd love to have you there. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm back home in the kitchen garden now, and one of the things I've just quickly done is pot out as many buckets and many items that can catch rain as I possibly can. We are expecting rain imminently. I think it's going to rain a lot this week, and so I want to catch as much rainwater as I can. You've no doubt noticed it has been a very dry year so far, and that is causing a lot of problems for many gardeners, and not just gardeners, many other situations where water is relied upon. So I really want to catch as much rainwater. I have 16 water butts in my garden, and they have been running a little low. However, one of the things that we've also been doing this week is sowing our seed of the month. Each month I like to share with you a seed that I think is perfect for sowing in that month. And this month I have chosen to sow our French beans, otherwise known as climbing beans or string beans or green beans. These are delicious. They come in many different forms, many different sizes. You can get dwarf beans, you can get normal sized beans, and you can get them in different colours and different types as well. I've added a few links, of course, to Premier Seeds of a few beans that I recommend you sow. And you'll find that in the blog post for this episode on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Anyway, sowing these beans are so incredibly easy. You can sow them directly, just digging a hole 2 centimetres in the ground, drop a seed in, backfill and water in well. At this time of year, you will certainly have no problems with frost, so it's certainly a way of doing it. For me, however, I still like to sow mine in the potting shed, just simply filling up some plug plant starters with compost, digging a hole, dropping a seed in and letting them grow. And once they germinate, we'll let them grow on until they're large enough to cope with being outside. Now, this doesn't take long. I reckon 7 days, depending on the seed and the conditions, until germination, and then probably another week or two before they can go outside. So very, very quick at this time of year. You will be surprised just how quick it all happens. But when it comes to planting them out, first of all, we've got to make sure we've cleared the bed of any weeds, as you know, and added a bit of compost. Now, beans, they're not particularly hungry plants, I find. They can cope with just a good layer of compost. But the most important thing that I think beans need is something to climb up. Now, you often see wigwams made out of bamboo canes or sticks or bean frames. And that's often what I use, bean frames made out of hazel sticks. And that's simple enough to do. Just take some sticks and tie them together. One of the hardest things that I actually find is getting them in the soil, particularly with my hazel sticks. Bamboo canes being a little bit thinner, I find that they can push into the soil as long as they're not too brittle. But hazel sticks, I find it to be a little bit harder. So what I use instead is a soil auger, which simply just attaches onto a drill a hole into the soil, push my stick into it, backfill the stick and then tread it round to firm it in. And it really is that easy. We simply make our hazel stick bean frame out of that and then they go ahead and grow. And I do find it really that easy. Now, of course, around the base of these sticks is where we're going to plant our beans. And they simply go in the ground, give them a good watering. And what eventually happens, and it always fascinates me how the beans do this, is they simply curl their way up around this stick. It is fascinating. Oh, I find it fascinating anyway. Now, one of the other methods of growing beans up something is what's known as the three sisters. And that's where the beans are planted at the base of corn, and therefore they then go and grow around the corn and use the corn as their climbing frame. This is a really natural way of growing. In fact, it was very common with the Native Americans. So it is very popular. It's known as the Three Sisters. You would then plant squash on the base just to shade out the soil a bit. Very, very popular way of growing this. And it's not something that I think we do that often, but it's certainly a very good way of using up whatever space you may have available. Anyway, as these plants grow, as long as they don't dry out, they grow quite strong, they grow quite firmly, and all they need is to keep weed free and a bit of watering. I don't tend to feed my beans. I don't find they need it. I don't think they're particularly hungry plants, but as they grow, eventually they'll produce flowers. And when they produce the flowers, they will eventually, as long as there's pollinators around, the bees and what have you, they will turn into bees. Now, depending on the variety, I like to pick these beans when they are young. And that's usually when I can start to feel the beans swelling inside the pods. And I just pick them off one by one, take them into the kitchen and quickly blanch them before we either cook with them or put them in the freezer. And we usually end up with quite a few. Now, green beans like this, if we buy them from a supermarket, are one of the most expensive items to buy. So this, for me, is a great reason that we should grow French beans. Now, one of the other things that I find is I grow a variety known as Bellotto. Now, these are red and white striped beans, and these are brilliant. These look fantastic. They look great on the allotment. They look like great in the kitchen garden. They are just a very attractive bean to grow. But what I also do with these is I pick them when they're young, but I also like to let a few grow until the seed pod goes dry. That way we get some dry beans out of them as well. Now, dry beans are fantastic. We store them as they are. They don't need any further preparation. They just simply come out of their pods and they go into a jar as dried beans. And then when we need to eat them, we often have to hydrate them and so on. But it's just a fantastic way of storing. Plus, I actually think they look really pretty as well. So they are one that I have to say I would definitely grow every year. And they're easy to save seeds from as well. So, Go give it a try. Grow your French beans, grow your green beans, and let me know how you get on. Now, added to that, other things that have been going on in the kitchen garden. One of the big things I've noticed is my citrus tree. I've often said over the last few weeks that my citrus tree looks like it died. It got a bit too cold over winter and it died back. Well, I was looking at it the other day because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I was looking at it and I noticed that it's starting to spring back into life. We're starting to see leaves and more branches appearing. So it hasn't died. I'm very, very, very happy about that because I do love my citrus. For me, they're just something that look great in the garden. They're something that just add a bit of a novelty. They're just such a great thing to grow. They're expensive as well. So that's another great reason that I'm pleased it has survived. We've also been harvesting lots and lots of items. Lettuce, spring onions, radish, to name a few, but also peas. Pretty much every day at the moment I am harvesting peas. Only a small amount every day, but the small amounts soon add up. And we've got peas that we're either using for dinner that night or they're going into the freezer. And it's fantastic to see just how many peas we are getting. Peas are often one of the plants that I think people say they wish they had more of. Often people eat them as soon as they harvest them because they're just so sweet and tasty. It does take a bit of willpower to not eat them as I'm picking them, but we get them in the kitchen and again we'll pop those in the freezer and they are fantastic. Rhubarb continues to come in as well, but we're also harvesting strawberries and raspberries. Really, we're getting a lot of harvests at the moment, so all our hard work is starting to pay off and I'm very, very happy with that. Now, one of the other things that we've been harvesting is our courgettes. We just started getting the courgettes, and that means we've got to look at ways of using courgettes. Courgettes are one of those plants that are prolific harvests. You often hear people saying that they're giving courgettes away left, right and centre. Well, I've come up with a recipe that uses courgettes, and that's what I'm going to talk about while I make my way into the potting shed. So, let's find out what's in the kitchen this week while I make my way to the potting shed.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Now, there's a moment every year, usually right around now, when the courgette plants shift from promising to relentless. One minute you're admiring the first tiny fruits, and the next you're wondering how on earth they've doubled in size overnight. It is the annual dance that we all know too well, and it always makes me smile. This week's recipe leans right into that early glut. It's simple, quick, and it uses ingredients most of us have growing or tucked away in the fridge. These fritters are crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, and lifted beautifully by fresh mint, bright lemon yogurt. They make a cracking light lunch. It is our recipe of the week, the early summer courgette and mint fritters with lemon yogurt. Now, this is really easy to make. First of all, we grate the courgettes, pop them in a colander and sprinkle with salt and leave that for 10 minutes. After that, we then squeeze out as much of that liquid as we possibly can. This is really key to keep the fritters crisp. Then, in a bowl, we whisk the eggs, fold in some flour and baking powder, and then we add the courgette, the spring onions, the mint, and a good grind of black pepper. Now, this mixture should be thick but spoonable. In a frying pan, heat a thin layer of oil over a medium heat and then drop in a heaped tablespoon of the mixture and just flatten it slightly. Cook for about 3 to 4 minutes on each side until golden and crisp. It's well worth doing this in batches. I find that works quite well. Now, full of lemon yogurt. It's simply, we take some yogurt, some lemon zest and some lemon juice, a bit of salt, a drizzle of olive oil, and mix it all together, and then we serve. It really is that easy. It's absolutely delicious. You will find the recipe on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk, but please do go give it a try and let me know how you get on. Now, just before I get into our book of the month, I just want to give you a bit of a bee update. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, I became a beekeeper, and every Sunday morning, I'm making a trip to our apiary to see how our bees are doing, to do our weekly bee checks. Well, this week, I'm pleased to say the bees have incredibly settled in. They were so calm when I checked on them. Didn't even seem that bothered by me. So really big plus there. My colony has grown. We started off with 6 frames of bees. We're now up to 8 frames of bees. And more importantly, they are drawing comb on pretty much all of the frames. So it's really looking positive. We are getting more bees as they are multiplying. I can see the drones. I can see everything that I expected to see. More importantly, I even saw the queen, which was really pleasing for me. I've been looking forward to spotting the queen, and I managed it this week. So yeah, really happy with how the bees are going. It looks like we're going to have to put the supers on very soon, which will mean we'll probably start being able to produce honey soon as well. So things are really looking good. Now, when I started in May, I didn't have a book of the month. It's usually a very busy month, but one of the things I found myself grabbing quite regularly throughout this month was a book called Home Brewing by Kevin Forbes. Now, this is a book I've had in my collection for quite a while, and the reason I grabbed it is that elderflowers at the moment, and they're just going past their best now, but they have been producing quite prolifically. And every year I like to make an elderflower cordial. The recipe I get is in this book. So I grabbed this book off the bookshelf and I made an elderflower cordial. But I found myself also looking through and thinking about making some country wines. And in fact, I've started making elderflower wine with thanks to this book. Now, as you know, I don't generally drink. I'm not very much into my alcohol, but I am always looking at how we can make the most of the produce that we buy. And this is where I found reading through this book to give me a few ideas. We're looking at making rhubarb wine. We're looking at making pea pod wine, just because I want to try and experiment and make the most of the produce that we have. Now, what I like about this particular book is it gives us lots of ideas of all the types of brewing that we could do. It includes things like beers and ciders and all the stuff you would expect, but also the country wines. And I found that reading this book, the recipes that it shares make it very easy to follow. So I think sometimes winemaking can sound very complicated, but this book made it sound very easy. It does state that you need quite a bit of equipment, be it the yeast, be it the nutrients, be it the demijohns, but luckily I had all these anyway. So this book for me throughout May has been a very promising. Now, the book I'm going to be reading throughout June is The Victorian Kitchen Garden by Jennifer Davies. I love reading about Victorian kitchen gardens. It's one of the things that really fascinates me. So I'm looking forward to reading this book and sharing it with you. Well, that brings us up to the end of this week's podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please rate and review on your podcast provider. Now, Lynn has left a comment on Spotify and she says, "Hi Richard, sounds like your bees are settling in nicely. That's great news. I know Chelsea Flower Show is making you think your gardening plans, but it's the heat at the moment that's really making me rethink my veg and flower growing long term." Lynn. Yeah, a lot of people are considering of making their gardens more and more drought tolerant. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast and you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Details on that at veggrowerpodcast.co.uk, which is, of course, our website. But while you are on our website, then please do leave us a comment or leave us a voicemail. If you would like to email me, my email address is richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. And finally, you can find me on social media. But don't forget to give us a follow and a subscribe at the same time. Well, that is it for this week. Thank you so much once again for joining me. We will be back again next time. So until then, please take care.